Imagine you invent a literal miracle, a little plastic pen that magically melts human fat. It works so well that your company actually becomes Europe's most valuable company. You are printing cash. And then, instead of riding off into the sunset, you decapitate your own leadership while watching your market value completely crater. Novo Nordisk, the maker of the weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy, lost 2/3 of its market value following a disappointing drug trial and a profit warning. 2/3 vanished. That is not a market correction. That is a multi-billion-dollar disaster. Here's where the mechanics of greed get incredibly weird. To stop the bleeding, the people pulling the strings behind the scenes staged a corporate coup so aggressive it makes a mafia family dispute look like a polite disagreement. Financial Times reports that a board shakeup blindsided the market, installing former Chief Executive Officer Lars Rebien Sørensen as chairman, while the current chairman and 6 other directors simultaneously stepped down. But Sørensen is not just the new chairman of Novo Nordisk. He is already the chair of its majority owner, the Novo Nordisk Foundation. To understand how insane this is, you have to look at the voting mechanics. According to the Financial Times, this foundation owns 28.1% of Novo's share capital, but wields an overwhelming 77.1% of its voting rights. The foundation essentially fired the old boss, and then the guy running the foundation gave himself the crown. The Financial Times literally quotes Kurt Jacobsen, a Copenhagen Business School professor, calling the board shakeup unbelievable. Jacobsen goes on the record stating Sørensen is now king of the Novo Nordisk kingdom, he told the paper. And this is a direct quote. This is a power concentration I have not seen in Danish business. So-called King Lars just casually took over a pharmaceutical empire. The Financial Times spoke to a former executive who noted that the changes were very much in character for Sørensen, stating he believes he is right and likes to be seen as a firm and decisive leader. Another person close to the company told the publication that Sørensen is a temperamental person who often acts before he does any planning and sees himself as a savior. A temperamental savior running a panicked monopoly. What could possibly go wrong? Why do this? Why create a corporate governance anomaly that concentrates all this power into the hands of one guy? Because the institutional panic at Novo Nordisk is absolute. The foundation ousted the former chief executive, a different Lars Frøgaard Jørgensen, in May. They blamed him directly for the massive stock slide, with the Financial Times citing an almost 60% share price fall in the past year, as profit growth slowed and investors worried about the pipeline. They replaced him with Mike Dostar. When billions of dollars evaporate, heads roll, the board hit the panic button because they realized their dominance was an illusion. They had the first mover advantage, but unfortunately for them, in the business world, that rarely works out. You see, the real existential threat to this Danish juggernaut was never a lack of global demand for skinny pens. Demand is virtually infinite. The real problem is that while Novo Nordisk was busy playing throne games in Copenhagen, a competitor in Indiana, Eli Lilly, figured out how to build a much better product. The mechanics of this oligopoly are completely absurd. The Economist points out that Novo Nordisk pumped $28 billion into capital expenditures over 4 years, just to keep the supply lines running. Imagine buying $28 billion worth of plumbing, just to find out someone else is tapping your pipes. Scarcity breeds opportunism. Because the Danish giant could not make enough skinny pens to feed the frenzy, they created a massive grey market. The Economist notes that in times of scarcity, the FDA permits compounding pharmacies to copy branded drugs. Novo Nordisk admits these compounders often procure active ingredients from China and charge much lower prices. They now account for 30% of all anti-obesity prescriptions in America. 30% stolen. It is like spending a decade building the most exclusive nightclub on earth, only to have a guy in the alley selling VIP wristbands made of duct tape for $5, and everyone is buying the duct tape. What does an arrogant empire do when it bleeds market share? It sues everybody. The Economist cites a tally by the broker Bernstein showing that Novo Nordisk has filed 130 lawsuits to stop the copycats in America. It is a game of legal whack-a-mole. The Financial Times highlights one absurdity, reporting that the telehealth group Hims & Hers attempted to offer a treatment at just $49 a month. For context, the Financial Times explicitly notes that Novo Nordisk was charging at least $1,000 a month for their official injectable Ozempic and Wegovy pens. Over $1,000 for the corporate plastic or a $50 bill for the alleyway equivalent. You do not need a degree in economics to figure out why the grey market exploded. But the real killer is not even the alleyway counterfeiters. It is the guy across the street with a brighter sign and a better product. The Economist spells it out perfectly. They state that Ozempic and Wegovy fell out of favor with doctors and patients the moment Eli Lilly launched its more effective concoctions, Mounjaro and Zepbound, in 2022 and 2023. Eli Lilly just strolled in and started eating Novo's lunch. The monopoly was over. Novo Nordisk panicked. They needed a shiny new asset to calm the markets. They did what almost every big company does in a crisis. They went shopping for potential mergers. The Financial Times reports that Novo's new chief executive went to bed thinking he had secured a $10 billion takeover of a biotech firm called Metsera. $10 billion. But when he woke up, Pfizer had clinched a deal despite only bidding $7.3 billion. Why on earth would a startup take nearly $3 billion less? The Financial Times explains that Metsera had decided that the American company's offer was the safer bet because it was more likely to pass regulatory scrutiny. The startup literally left billions on the table because they were terrified of antitrust regulators stepping in over the potential merger. Novo Nordisk tried to buy their way out of a corner with a $10 billion check, but they forgot one very basic rule. In the American free market, money talks, but regulatory fear screams louder. And that fear was about to manifest into a spectacular disaster. Let us talk about the sheer arrogance of institutional desperation. The Financial Times paints a picture of a chief executive who is completely out of touch with reality. So what does the chief executive do? He throws a public tantrum. The Financial Times reports Dolstar was so frustrated he actually tried to provoke Pfizer to raise its bid during a press conference in the Oval Office. He told the Financial Times, and I quote, "I felt not in America, where there is free market advocacy, shareholder value creation, that there's just something unfair." He's complaining about unfairness. The guy running a monopoly is complaining about fairness. But the public humiliation was just the appetizer. The market demands miracles, and Novo Nordisk tried to serve them a dud. CNBC reports that their experimental drug, CagriSema, didn't achieve its primary endpoint of demonstrating non-inferiority on weight loss when compared to Eli Lilly's rival drug tirzepatide after 84 weeks. Novo's fancy new injection achieved a weight loss of 23%, completely missing the 25.5% mark set by Eli Lilly. The stock market did what the stock market does when an illusion shatters. It violently corrected. Novo's shares fell more than 15% following the news. And then, more bad news. Reuters, via the Financial Times, stated that shares in Novo Nordisk slumped after the company said one of its diabetes drugs had failed to slow the progression of Alzheimer's in late-stage trials. They called it the lottery ticket, but the data from the trials failed to confirm the superiority of semaglutide versus a placebo. The result? The company's shares fell as much as 12% on a single Monday. A total collapse. When executives burn billions of dollars and embarrass themselves on the global stage, who pays the price? The workers. The Financial Times details the brutal human consequence, reporting that Novo Nordisk is to cut 11% of jobs, meaning 9,000 workers fired, just so the drug maker can save $1.3 billion. The new boss, Dolstar, justified this bloodbath by claiming they need an increased performance-based culture. Firing the receptionist will definitely fix the fact that Eli Lilly makes better medicine. But here is the darkest part of this corporate tragedy. Chopping 11% of your workforce trims the fat, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the price in guillotine currently dropping in Washington. Let us look at the final nail in the coffin, the macro nightmare. You can fire 9,000 people to protect your bottom line, but you cannot fire the President of the United States. The Financial Times explicitly states that Novo Nordisk is facing price cuts in the United States that their chief executive described as painful. Painful is a polite corporate translation for getting your margins completely eviscerated. It turns out that when a medicine becomes a cultural phenomenon, politicians tend to notice. The Financial Times reports that, as part of a most favored nation agreement, pharmaceutical groups have to peg United States drug prices at the lowest price paid in other developed countries. The Financial Times highlights that this means cutting the price of injectable Ozempic and Wegovy drugs from at least $1,000 a month to $350 when purchased on TrumpRx, the president's new direct-to-consumer website. For consumers, this is great, but for Novo, not so much. Imagine running a luxury car dealership and the government suddenly kicks down the door and mandates you sell every vehicle for the price of a used bicycle. The math simply stops working. But the margin squeeze gets so much worse. The future of this industry is not a syringe, it is a daily pill. The Financial Times reports that the United States drug regulator approved a daily pill version of Novo Nordisk's Wegovy injection. Getting the pill approved is a massive logistical win, but the price tag is the real financial guillotine. The Financial Times notes that the Wegovy pill will be available at $149 a month. This is after the company negotiated with Donald Trump's administration to cut prices for obesity drugs from over $1,000 down to $149. And the government is not just targeting the Danish kings. The Financial Times points out that the White House said Eli Lilly's pill would cost $346 a month through the president's new website. But future pills would also be priced at $149 a month, a total industry-wide race to the absolute bottom. The executives know exactly what this means for the firms. The Financial Times reports that Novo's chief financial officer admitted these new United States pricing models would hurt sales on two fronts. Firstly, damaging revenue from cash-paying consumers, and secondly, hurting insurance reimbursements. The financial reality of this bloodbath is already hitting the balance sheet. The Financial Times notes the company announced it expected net sales to fall by as much as 13% this year. Curing obesity is an absolute, undeniable scientific miracle. It will change the trajectory of human health. But it is a fundamentally terrible long-term business model when governments absolutely refuse to pay premium margins for consumer health. You invent the Holy Grail, you show it to the entire world, and the government immediately regulates your profit margin down to pocket change. The era of easy, limitless growth is officially over. The monopoly is dead. The margins are crushed, the fat is gone, but so is the money. If you found this video interesting, subscribe and go check out why the SaaS industry is taking a massive hit because of AI. Thank you for watching.